Perry now. He's a former regional editor for the Associated Press in Europe, Middle East and Africa. He joins us from Tel Aviv. A very warm welcome to you. So I want to start by asking you about the Israeli army taking responsibility for the likely killing of these 3 Israeli captives last November. I mean, what implications does this apparent admission have for Benjamin Netanyahu's war strategy in the early weeks of the conflict and, of course, now?
Well, there's no secret that the hostages are themselves endangered by Israeli bombardments. I don't think Israel would claim that they know exactly where all the hostages are at all times. And so the implication, of course, is that it's possible they would bomb their own people by mistake. And certain hostages that have come out, when they're already free to speak freely, have said that they were scared by the bombardments. So I think this is essentially a reflection of a risk that Israel knowingly undertakes when its strategy is basically to try to smoke out Hamas in a manner that includes bombardment of areas where they don't know exactly who is there. Certainly, the Israeli army has not admitted to targeting these people. And by the way, I must take exception with the report that claimed that the tragic civilian deaths today were families who were targeted. I see no evidence that Israel purposely targets any particular person, but it is a reasonable accusation that they don't take enough care. And clearly, this incident with the 3 hostages who were killed is a reflection of that. It's an incredibly tragic and unbelievably unfortunate situation.
Unfortunate situation, but of course it has huge political implications, doesn't it? If indeed these individuals were, you suggest, collateral in Benjamin Netanyahu's war in Gaza.
Yeah, but Israel does not have a good option. It has to choose the less bad option. If those who are arguing that Israel should agree to Hamas's conditions, take back the hostages, give up whatever prisoners, including convicted murderers, are required, and pull out of Gaza and leave Hamas in power in order to end all this, then in the course of making that argument, part of a factor is that, look, we're killing our own people and this just can't continue. However, I believe that this has already been factored in, so that the army has concluded that this is a case where their own bombardment was responsible doesn't really move the needle, because they knew that this was a risk. And look, I mean, polls in Israel do show that the situation I just described, which is a bit of a capitulation for Israel if the result is that Hamas remains in power at the end of the day in Gaza, does have polls show majority support in Israel, but it's only about 65%. Now think of that. Almost 2/3 of Israelis would agree, basically, to give up on their major war aim of ending the rule of Hamas in Gaza just to get back the hostages. But it isn't 90%. If it was 90%, Netanyahu would feel pressure. If it's about 2/3, I think he thinks he can still withstand the pressure. And his coalition isn't yet falling apart in panic. If you ask me if this conclusion to this particular investigation of what happened to these hostages will change that, I don't think so. And basically, it's because of the near consensus in Israel that Hamas must not be allowed.
But there are,
to remain in
Gaza. Near consensus, you say, about the overall objectives of the conflict, as you say, to remove Hamas from the equation. But we are, as we talk now, looking at massive demonstrations on the streets of Tel Aviv, other towns and cities across the country. To remove the human element from this is somewhat negligent on the part of the Israeli government, isn't it? You talk about Netanyahu being able to withstand the pressure, but at the end of the day, he's a politician, isn't he? He's not a military man simply calling the shots.
Netanyahu is among the more utilitarian, transactional, and cynical politicians I've ever seen. I think he does his calculations, and these are large demonstrations, but he knows that half of Israel hates him, and he knows that 2/3 of the public would do the deal. So some of his supporters, past supporters, would do the deal just because it's been too long. Had they succeeded in eradicating Hamas in 3 months, it would be different, but it'll soon be a year. That's the political landscape. As I said before, the fact that he still has the support of almost 40% is something he believes clearly he can work with. He can invent some narrative in the next election, if he holds out until then, which he well might, that will win them back somehow. The demonstrations don't change that much. And by the way, historically, in democratic countries, demonstrations don't necessarily force governments to take action. Maybe Paris in 1968, but it's rare. They're looking at the polls They're looking at political machinations that they can undergo, and they're also, I think, thinking that whatever is compelling these hundreds of thousands to go to the street today, which is basically a desire to get back the hostages at almost any cost,
Right.
may no longer be part of the discussion in a year or two, when who knows what will happen, a war with Hezbollah in Lebanon and other potential escalations.
Those political calculations clearly, though, cold comfort for many who are waiting on both sides of this conflict for their loved ones to remain safe or to return home. Dan Perry, former regional editor of the AP in Europe, Middle East and Africa. Many thanks for joining us live from Tel Aviv, then.
Thank you.